The chandeliers above shimmered like frozen constellations, casting silvery light upon Isla Monroe as she stood wrapped in a bridal gown so delicate it looked like a whisper of winter, each lace detail sewn with dreams she barely dared to believe in. Around her, the ballroom buzzed with forced congratulations and tight-lipped smiles. But Grant Whitmore, her groom, the enigma, the blue-eyed heir to a billion-dollar legacy, stood beside her like a statue carved from distance. His tuxedo was flawless, his jaw sharp as truth, but his gaze never met hers, not even when the vows left their lips like borrowed words. There was no kiss to seal the union, just the sound of heels clicking on marble as the crowd broke into applause that felt too loud for a moment, so hollow. Isla blinked against the light, trying to absorb the surrealness of a wedding that felt more like a transaction, each moment choreographed with care, but absent of soul. As the guests faded like fog, her hands trembled softly against the cool silk of her dress, her new ring glinting on a hand that didn't feel like hers. Grant walked away, back straight, shoulders tight, vanishing into his study with a glass of bourbon and a world she wasn't invited into. Isla stood at the foot of the grand staircase alone, her breath catching in the gold-threaded silence of Whitmore Manor, each step echoing like a question with no answer. Upstairs, the master bedroom waited, lavishly decorated in creams and pearls, but as empty of affection as the marriage it was meant to shelter. She sat on the edge of the massive bed, her fingers playing with the hem of her gown, wondering how it felt to be cherished, to be seen, to be wanted. The rain tapped at the windows like a lullaby too lonely to soothe, and she knew deeply, that Grant had not married her for love, nor even desire, but to satisfy an arrangement inked long before she entered his world. Her father had brokered the deal like an investment, her mother had styled her like a doll, but no one had asked Isla if her heart agreed. She had dared to imagine that maybe, with time, she could earn his tenderness, melt the frost in his eyes, find warmth beneath his armor. But tonight, all she had was silence, and a side of the bed that stayed untouched. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old wood, a blend that should have calmed her, but only deepened the ache. She looked around, at the portraits on the walls, at the monogram pillows, at the mirrored dresser where her reflection stared back like a stranger. Grant was downstairs, lost in ledgers and legacies, while his bride sat in stillness, counting the seconds since she became his wife. She pulled the combs from her hair, letting it fall in soft waves over her shoulders, remembering how once upon a time she dreamed of a husband who would kiss her forehead and say her name like it mattered. Here she was Isla Whitmore by law, but not by heart, and that mattered. She slipped off her heels and walked barefoot to the window, the cold marble floor shocking her skin into alertness, as if to say, "This is real." The rain poured harder now, like heaven crying out the words Isla couldn't. She rested her hand on the glass, wishing someone would reach for her on the other side. But no one did. Not Grant, not anyone. She sat back down on the bed, unzipping her dress carefully, folding it beside her like silk memories. Slipping into a satin robe, she curled into herself beneath the thick comforter, staring at the empty space where her husband should be. Her heart beat loud in her ears, not from excitement, but from disappointment deeper than words. Every love story she had read as a girl was a lie. In those pages, the man always came for the bride. He fought for her. He wanted her. But not here. Not tonight. Grant hadn't even tried. She bit her lower lip, willing herself not to cry, not to be weak, not to let this night define her. But it already had. She didn't feel like a bride. She felt like a bargaining chip, wrapped in lace, left unopened. The storm raged louder, as if echoing her turmoil. Still, she didn't move, didn't call for him, didn't beg. If he didn't want her, then she wouldn't chase him. But it hurt. Oh, it hurt like abandonment does when you're too proud to show it. And in that echoing space, she whispered to the shadows, "So this is what it means to be chosen, but not wanted." Her voice cracked, but her spine stayed straight. That night, Isla learned something powerful. Love couldn't be forced, but dignity could be chosen. She turned off the lamp, burying herself in darkness, where no one could see her heart break, not even him. especially not him. Grant Whitmore moved through the sprawling Whitmore estate like a shadow, a man imprisoned by his own walls of steel and silence, wearing his cold suits like armor against the world, and most of all, against Isla. To the outside eye, he was the consummate businessman, sharp, unyielding, a titan in the boardroom whose presence commanded respect and fear alike. But beneath that carefully sculpted exterior, he was a man caught in the crossfire of memories too painful to relive, memories that kept his heart locked behind thick iron doors. Each morning he awoke with a heaviness that no amount of power or wealth could erase, his blue eyes clouded with ghosts. The world saw only the millionaire, the man who built empires with his bare hands, who crushed rivals with a single word. But Isla, his innocent bride, was the one who unknowingly stirred a fragile ember buried deep inside. Grant watched her from across the grand halls, from behind the wide windows framed by heavy velvet drapes, eyes that observed but never approached, haunted by a fear he refused to admit even to himself. He watched as Isla moved with a grace so genuine, it unsettled him. The way her laughter danced like sunlight through the garden, mingling with the fragrance of blooming roses. The way her fingers trailed lovingly over the spines of the leather-bound books in the library, as if they whispered secrets meant only for her. The quiet moments when she hummed soft melodies that floated through the empty corridors, filling spaces that had long been silent. Those small acts of warmth and life should have comforted him, but instead they pierced the cold armor he wore so tightly. For Grant knew all too well what closeness meant, and it terrified him. The last time he had dared to open his heart, it had been crushed beneath the weight of betrayal, a betrayal that left scars deeper than the eye could see, a pain so raw that love itself became a battlefield he no longer wished to fight. So, he kept Isla at arm's length, guarding himself against the vulnerability her innocence demanded. He spoke only when absolutely necessary, his voice measured and distant. Words like carefully aimed arrows that never touched her soul. To the staff, their interactions were courteous but formal, like the pages of a contract being signed and sealed with no emotion involved. But Grant's eyes betrayed a different truth. Eyes that watched Isla with an intensity no one else could see, eyes that traced the delicate curve of her smile, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the subtle way her emerald eyes sparkled when she was lost in thought. Each glance was a battle, each moment of silent observation, a confession he could not voice. And yet, despite his resolve, every time their eyes met, those vivid green orbs locking with his piercing blue, something stirred inside him, something fragile and unexpected. Like the first fragile bloom after a harsh winter, it was a flicker of warmth he refused to name, an ember of feeling that made his chest tighten and his mind spin. But he pushed it down, buried it beneath layers of cold logic and bitter experience. "She's not yours to love," he reminded himself bitterly, repeating the mantra that kept him tethered to reality. "She's just a name on a contract, a promise made by families who never cared about the beating hearts trapped within." Yet in the quiet moments when the mansion was still and the moon cast silver shadows through the tall windows, Grant wrestled with the truth his mind would not accept. Isla was not just a name or a duty. She was the unexpected light in his darkness, the fragile hope he feared to embrace. And though he guarded himself fiercely, the walls he built around his heart began to crack, imperceptibly but surely, threatened by the very woman he refused to touch. All the while, Isla remained unaware of the silent war raging in the man beside her, believing herself invisible, unloved, and untouched by the storm of emotions swirling beneath his cold exterior. But Grant's gaze was never truly elsewhere. It was always drawn back to her, watching, waiting, and struggling with a heart too wounded to heal. The mansion echoed with unspoken words and unanswered questions, and the space between them stretched wide, a chasm filled with fear, regret, and the painful silence of two souls aching to connect but too afraid to try. As days slipped into nights, and nights folded into mornings, Isla continued to navigate this loveless marriage, unaware that the man who ignored her was fighting his own battle, one that could either shatter them both or finally set them free. The stormy night that awaited was more than just weather. It was a reckoning, a breaking point where the fragile threads of fate would unravel, and the true story between Isla and Grant would begin to unfold. But for now, the millionaire remained a man lost in his own prison, eyes watching, heart waiting. Eyes watching, heart waiting, and the innocent bride still alone in a mansion that was anything but a home. The discovery of the locked attic door was a moment that shifted everything for Isla, an unexpected crack in the carefully constructed world she had stepped into. The mansion, with its grand halls and ornate decor, held secrets whispered through its very walls. And now Isla was about to unearth one of its deepest and most painful. The afternoon sunlight barely reached the top of the spiral staircase where the door sat, heavy and forbidding, its wood weathered by time and neglect. A strange pull urged her closer, a mixture of fear and irresistible curiosity swirling in her chest. When she asked the maid about it, the soft voice that answered was almost a whisper, trembling with something between sorrow and warning. That was Miss Amelia's room. The name Amelia fell like a thunderclap in Isla's mind, sharp and cold as ice, stirring a strange ache she hadn't known she was capable of feeling. That night, the storm came, unrelenting and fierce, shaking the mansion's foundations and rattling the windows as if nature itself wanted to tear down the walls of silence and secrets. Lightning flashed, illuminating the shadows in jagged bursts, and the wind yanked open the attic window with a violent force, throwing the heavy curtains into wild, frantic waves. It was as though the storm itself had granted Isla permission to enter the forbidden space, to confront the ghost that haunted this mansion. Climbing the narrow, creaking staircase, her heart pounded with every step as the attic door loomed ahead, a threshold between the past and the present. The lock was brittle from years of disuse, and with a trembling hand, she managed to pry it open, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memories, the scent of forgotten years heavy in her lungs. Sheets draped over old furniture swayed slightly in the draft, like ghosts frozen in time. Faded photographs lay scattered on a cracked wooden desk, pictures of a woman with a soft smile and eyes full of hope. A woman who looked so much like Isla herself, it was uncanny. On the floor, an envelope sealed with crimson wax caught Isla's attention. Her fingers shook as she broke the seal and unfolded the fragile paper inside. The letter was addressed to Grant, and the words hit her like a tidal wave, each sentence dripping with heartbreak and regret. "You gave me everything, and I still chose someone else. I'm sorry. Amelia." Those words bled from the page, raw and honest, revealing a story Isla had never been told, a story that had been buried beneath layers of silence and pride. She read and reread the letter, piecing together the fragments of a love that once burned bright, but was extinguished by betrayal. Amelia had been the woman Grant loved, the one he had planned his future with, only to have that dream shattered when she walked away 2 days before their wedding, leaving him for his best friend. The pain behind those words was palpable, a wound that refused to heal, and suddenly everything about Grant's distant coldness made sense. Isla wasn't just living in a mansion. She was living in the ruins of a man's broken heart, a castle still soaked in the bleeding wounds of lost love and shattered trust. As the storm howled outside and rain lashed against the windows, Isla felt the weight of a truth she hadn't wanted to face, that the man beside her was haunted by a past he couldn't forget, and that past was wrapped tightly around them both, binding them in silence and sorrow. The walls seemed to whisper secrets of love and loss, and Isla realized she was no longer just a passive player in a loveless marriage. She was becoming a witness to a tragedy that demanded understanding, compassion, and perhaps forgiveness. The letter lay in her hands like a fragile lifeline, and as the attic grew colder and darker, Isla made a silent vow to uncover the full story, to find the pieces of Grant's shattered heart, and to discover if there was any hope left for them both in the shadows of the past. But the mansion was more than just a home. It was a prison of memories, and the path to healing would be long, winding, and fraught with challenges neither of them could yet imagine. And as Isla stood there, caught between the echoes of yesterday and the uncertainties of tomorrow, she understood that the greatest storm was not outside, but within, the storm of love lost, trust broken, and hearts waiting to be mended. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil swirling inside the mansion as thunder rumbled through the skies and rain lashed violently against the windows, echoing the chaos in Isla's heart. That night, when Grant finally returned, the front door slammed with the weight of his frustration and exhaustion, his clothes soaked through, droplets falling from his dark hair like a cascade of unspoken pain. His usual composed facade was cracked, revealing the burden he carried, one so heavy it bent his shoulders and clouded the icy blue of his eyes with shadows. Isla had been waiting, the ache of loneliness wrapped around her like a second skin, and when she saw him standing in the hallway, drenched and weary, all the walls she had built inside threatened to crumble. The moment held fragile hope, an opportunity for connection that Isla dared to grasp as she stepped forward, voice soft but filled with quiet strength. "You're drenched, let me help you." But the words seemed to bounce off an invisible barrier between them, for Grant's response was a sharp push, cold and cutting. "Don't pretend to care." It was a slap she never expected, the sting sharper than any storm outside. Tears welled in Isla's eyes, threatening to spill, but this time, something inside her shifted. She no longer felt like the invisible bride, the silent shadow in the mansion's grand halls. Instead, she found courage rising, fueled by years of aching silence and the deep longing for something real. "No, Grant, I'm not pretending," she said, voice trembling yet resolute, breaking through the cold air like a fragile dawn. "I've been silent, I've been patient, but I'm not a ghost, I'm your wife." The words hung heavy between them, a truth she could no longer keep buried beneath the surface. "You can keep punishing me for someone else's betrayal," she continued, tears streaming freely now, "but I won't apologize for loving you." The confession shattered the space between them, echoing louder than the storm's roar outside. For a moment, Grant stood frozen, stunned by the unexpected strength and raw honesty in Isla's voice, a mirror reflecting the pain he'd locked away deep inside. Their gazes locked, pain meeting pain, vulnerability trembling like a fragile bridge stretched across a chasm of lost trust. And yet, despite the crack in his armor, despite the flicker of something fragile and human in his eyes, Grant turned away, retreating into the shadows once more. The wound that was love still felt too deep, too fresh, too dangerous to touch. For him, love was not a refuge. It was a battlefield, scarred by memories of betrayal and heartbreak that had shaped him into the man he had become. And so the silence stretched between them again, thick and suffocating, filled with everything left unsaid and every dream deferred. But Isla, standing alone in the hallway now, felt something stir within her, a quiet defiance, a whispered promise that she would not fade away like a ghost in this mansion of pain. The night wrapped around her like a shroud, but beneath the fear and sorrow was a flicker of hope, faint but stubborn, burning quietly like a candle against the dark. She knew the road ahead would be treacherous, lined with broken trust and bruised hearts, but she was determined to fight, not just for herself, but for the man who stood just out of reach, wounded and lost. As the storm raged on, washing away the past in torrents of rain, Isla's voice, broken but unyielding, became the first ripple in the still waters of their fractured love. A voice that refused to be silenced, a heart that refused to give up, and a love that, even in its deepest wounds, held the promise of healing yet to come. The storm outside had transformed from a mere disturbance into a relentless tempest, howling with a fury that shook the very foundations of the Whitmore mansion, plunging the sprawling estate into complete darkness as the power abruptly failed. In the quiet shadow of the blackout, only the faint flicker of candles illuminated the grand kitchen, where Sheila stood barefoot on the cold marble floor, her hands covered in flour as she kneaded dough, trying to find calm in the chaos that raged both outside and within her heart. She was baking cookies, not out of habit or necessity, but as a small rebellion against the loneliness that had wrapped around her since the wedding night, a way to create light and warmth where there was none. The scent of vanilla and sugar filled the air, mingling with the scent of rain and damp earth seeping through the cracked window panes. Suddenly, the heavy front door creaked open, and Grant entered, his usually pristine suit damp and disheveled, water dripping from his hair and shoulders. His expression was tired, hardened by the long day, yet softened by the sight of her in this unexpected moment. A gentle laugh escaped him, a sound Isla had never heard from him before, soft and unexpectedly warm. "You're baking in the dark?" he asked, eyes crinkling with a hint of amusement and something else she could hardly name. Isla smiled, her lips curving with quiet determination as she replied, "I find light in small things, even in storms." Those words lingered between them, heavy with meaning, as the storm's wrath continued its furious song outside. That night, as thunder rolled like a distant drum and lightning flashed like the fractured pieces of their past, something between them shifted, subtle yet profound. They sat side by side at the old wooden kitchen table, sharing warm cookies fresh from the oven, their fingers brushing accidentally, sending sparks of something neither could deny. Grant's piercing blue eyes held hers, searching, probing deeper than the surface. Finally seeing her, the woman who had been there all along, quiet, patient, and beautiful. And beneath the roar of the storm, he finally spoke, voice low and trembling with vulnerability. "I've been afraid. Afraid of you. Afraid of feeling again." The confession hung in the air, raw and honest, a crack in the fortress he had so carefully built around his heart. Isla reached out slowly, her fingers tracing the faint scar near his temple, a mark of past battles and pain. "I'm not Amelia," she whispered, her touch gentle and sure, a promise of new beginnings. The moment stretched, fragile and sacred, before Grant leaned in, cautiously, as if testing the water for the first time in years. Their lips met, not in fiery passion, but in a tender, healing kiss that spoke of hope, of forgiveness, and of a love that could rise from the ashes of broken trust. It was a kiss that said, "Maybe this time, love will stay." They didn't cross the line that night. There was no rush to dissolve the walls they had built, no need to force what must come naturally. Instead, Grant held her close in the quiet darkness, a silent acknowledgement of the fragile bond forming between them. In that embrace, for the first time since the wedding, Isla felt the mansion around them transform, from a cold, empty house into something warm and alive, a home. And as the storm outside finally began to wane, the space between them filled with a promise, one that whispered of healing, of trust slowly rebuilt, and of a love that, though battered and bruised, was finally allowed to breathe. The gala was supposed to be a night of celebration, but for Isla, it became the night her world collapsed. Surrounded by glittering chandeliers and murmurs of the city's elite, she felt a chill not from the cold air, but from the whispered words that cut through the festive buzz. As she moved quietly near the grand hall's edge, a voice caught her attention. Grant's cousin, speaking with a lawyer in hushed, merciless tones. "She's not pregnant, is she? The prenup says no child, no inheritance. Grant's playing smart. Marry her, use her, walk away richer." The cruel certainty in the words was like a dagger twisting in her chest, each syllable heavier than the last. Her breath hitched, her vision blurred, and for a moment the room spun around her like a cruel carnival. She had given Grant her trust, her heart, her very soul, believing in a future built together. But now she was nothing more than a strategic move in a cold game of power and wealth, a disposable piece in a ruthless chess match. The laughter and music faded into an unbearable silence as the truth seeped into her bones. The man she married might never have loved her. She was a transaction, a contract, an innocent caught in a merciless bargain. Returning home that night, the mansion felt suffocating, the walls closing in with the weight of betrayal. Her hands trembled as she held the packed suitcase, the fabric of her dreams unraveling thread by thread. When Grant walked through the door, soaked and weary from the storm, she confronted him with tear-filled eyes and a voice cracked by anguish. "Was this just a plan to save your company?" His face paled, the confident mask slipping to reveal raw vulnerability and regret. "Isla, no. It started like that, but not anymore," he pleaded, his voice heavy with truth and desperation. Yet the damage was profound. Years of silence, of walls built to guard broken hearts, had carved an unbridgeable distance between them. Isla's pain was fierce and palpable, her sobs echoing through the empty halls as she laid bare the depths of her shattered trust. "You never told me. I gave you everything, my heart, my hope, my future, and you hid the truth," she whispered, the weight of betrayal pressing down like a stormy sky about to break. "You broke me, Grant, just like she broke you," she added, her words a mirror of his own past heartbreak, yet harsher because they cut so close to home. The silence that followed was suffocating, filled with the echoes of all the unspoken words, the lost chances, the dreams that would never come to be. With a final look that carried both sorrow and strength, Akela stepped out into the raging storm, her silhouette swallowed by the night and the relentless rain. Each drop that soaked her was like a baptism, a painful cleansing of a love tainted by secrets and lies. Grant fell to his knees in the grand foyer, the opulence around him mocking the ruin of his heart. The power he wielded in the boardroom could not save him from the devastation of losing the woman who had finally made him confront his fears. For the first time, he was powerless, broken not by an enemy but by his own guarded heart and the harsh truths that had torn them apart. Outside, Isla's footsteps were swallowed by thunder and wind, a haunting reminder that sometimes love is not enough to heal wounds buried too deep. And in the hollow silence left behind, both of them were left to wrestle with the unbearable weight of betrayal, the painful silence that followed, and the fragile hope that maybe, someday, forgiveness could be found amidst the ruins of a love once pure and innocent. Weeks passed in a blur of cold emptiness for Grant, his life a hollow echo of what it had been when Isla was by his side. Every room of the mansion, once filled with promises and dreams, now seemed like a mausoleum of forgotten hopes and silent regrets. His business deals continued, numbers rose, and his fortune grew. But the spaces between each achievement stretched wider and colder without her laughter to warm them. His nights were restless, haunted by the ghost of her absence, and the memories of the painful words they had exchanged, the betrayals uncovered, and the love he had been too afraid to fully embrace. He searched for her everywhere, from the glittering skyscrapers of New York to the quiet corners of the city's parks, desperate to find even a trace of the woman who had stolen his heart and fled with it, leaving him lost in the storm they had created. Then, one ordinary morning, a simple envelope arrived at his office, unmarked but heavy with promise. Opening it, his eyes fell upon a photograph that stopped his breath. A picture of Isla, glowing with genuine joy, surrounded by children in a small-town shelter, her green eyes shining with a light he hadn't seen in months. The letter inside was written in her careful, familiar hand, each word a thread weaving together the pain of their past and the hope for a future he hadn't dared imagine. She told him she hadn't left to punish or to spite him, but to find herself again, to heal the wounds that had kept them both trapped in silence and distance. She challenged him to show her the truth of his love, not the hollow promises forged by fear and convenience, but the raw, unguarded honesty she deserved. Grant read and reread the letter, feeling the weight of every sentence pressing on his heart, stirring a resolve deeper than any he had ever known. Without hesitation, he signed away the company that had defined him, a symbolic gesture of shedding the past and the power that had isolated him, and booked a flight to the small town where Isla had found refuge and purpose. When he arrived, the world seemed to shift around him, the air lighter, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the distant laughter of children. There, in the middle of a sunlit garden blooming with wildflowers, he saw her, Isla, alive and radiant, her spirit unbroken despite the scars of their shared past. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, surprise flashing in her eyes, quickly tempered by a guarded wariness born from months of pain and unanswered questions. But Grant did not come with grand gestures or riches. He came as a man humbled by his mistakes, stripped of pride and ego, kneeling before her not with a ring, but with a heart laid bare and trembling with hope. "I'm not here as a millionaire," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "I'm here as a man who finally understands what love truly means. Not power, not contracts, but the courage to be vulnerable, to trust again." Isla's eyes filled with tears, the years of hurt and silence threatening to overwhelm her. But she held on to the fragile hope he offered. His hand reached out slowly, gently brushing her cheek as if memorizing the curve of her smile, the softness of her skin, a touch that spoke louder than any vow. If you'll have me, he continued, not for my name or fortune, but for who I am, flawed and human, I promise to never let you go again. Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with emotion as she replied, this time don't let the storm pass without holding on. In that moment, the past, the betrayals, the heartbreaks, the silences, fell away like autumn leaves, and all that remained was the unspoken promise between two souls who had fought through darkness to find their way back to each other. They embraced, the warmth of their bodies dissolving years of cold distance, their hearts beating in sync for the first time in forever. The mansion, once a lonely fortress, felt alive again, filled with the quiet strength of love renewed and the hope of a future crafted not from fear, but from trust and understanding. Outside, the storm that had raged through their lives finally began to clear, leaving behind a sky washed clean by rain and streaked with golden sunlight, a reflection of the love that had survived and grown stronger against all odds. And as they stood together in that garden, surrounded by the gentle hum of life and laughter, Grant and Isla knew their story was no longer defined by pain and betrayal, but by the beautiful truth that love, when truly given and received, could heal even the deepest wounds and rewrite the most broken chapters of their lives.